There is a powerful African proverb that says, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. When it comes to the ground war between Russia and Ukraine, is it possible to apply this proverb? Well, in this AfriKili video, we clarify the metaphor by identifying who the elephants are and who the grass is in a Russian-Ukrainian war. We'll also discuss the impact of the war on Africans in Africa and in the diaspora. Finally, we discuss how Africans can gain enough strength to command respect in international relations to destroy all the historical pillars of systemic injustices against black people around the world. So there you have it. Let's dive in. Let's get to it. Hello family, welcome to AfriKili, where we advocate for the creation of a federal United States of Africa by focusing on three pillars: Pan-African history, Pan-African business, and Pan-African political action. As a reminder, the word AfriKili is a contraction of the words Africa and Akili, which means intelligence in Swahili, which is the most spoken language in Africa. So AfriKili stands for African intelligence. Keep in mind, you can also read our blog online, or you can sign up to have them delivered directly to your mailbox by entering your email address on our website, which is www.afrikili.com. Well, in today's video, we'll focus on Pan-African politics, specifically in the context of the war between Russia and Ukraine. You know, since Russia launched its ground war in Ukraine on February 24, 2022, the conflict has occupied most of the news coverage on the Western television and radio coverage. Initially, when the conflict began, reports of troops marching on Ukrainian territory created such an overwhelming feeling of shock, anger, resentment on most Western airwaves. But now, 4 months into the conflict, that initial shock seems to have faded and new trends have emerged in discussions about the war. In the context of AfriKili, I'm mostly interested in discussing the impacts of the war on Africans in the African continent, but also in the diaspora. And I'm reminded of a powerful African proverb that says, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Is it possible to apply that metaphor to the war in Ukraine? I think it is possible, but we need to clarify who the elephants are and who the grass is. So in this context, I'm proposing that the elephants will be Russia on one side and the West on the other side, which is led by the United States and the European Union countries such as France and the United Kingdom. Now, even though officially Ukraine and Russia are the only nations on the battlefront, but Ukraine is clearly a proxy for the West. Because once they understood that a Russian victory could shift the geopolitical balance of power in the region and pose an existential threat to the hegemony of the current world order, the West decided to stand mostly unified in their desire to help Ukraine resist the invasion from its powerful neighbor. Well, when it comes to the grass, back to our proverb, it is represented by all the innocent people that are hurt, killed, or just caught in the crossfire without asking to be part of the war. For example, all the innocent Ukrainian population is part of the grass in this metaphor. However, in the context of AfriKili, I want to focus on Africans that are also caught in the crossfire with no desire to be part of the conflict. Specifically, I want to look at three events: racism on the border, votes at the UN, and food shortages. So firstly, let's look at racism that always seems to show up. You know, at the beginning of the war, there was a degrading and dehumanizing racism that was faced by black people. If you recall, when the Ukraine invasion began, expectedly, hundreds of thousands of people became displaced as they were attempting to run away from the battlegrounds. And so as the displaced populations reached the border with Poland, we saw many of them who were warmly welcomed. Unfortunately, as the crowds were getting through checkpoints at the border, we witnessed the unacceptable treatment inflicted on black people. They were separated from white people in the crowd and were prevented at gunpoint from crossing into Poland simply because their skin was black. That segregated group was mostly made of young black college students who had been studying in Ukraine. And it took an international outcry for Poland to finally let the group of black people into the country, just as they were providing refuge to the other white displaced population. Now, secondly, there is the votes at the United Nations General Assembly, designed to sanction Russia for its invasion on Ukraine. Just like during the Cold War era, when the West and the Soviet bloc were engaged opposing each other, African countries were once again pressured to expressly choose a side in the current war. This time around, unlike in the Cold War era, many African countries refused to align with the West and voted against the sanction. A few other African countries decided to abstain from voting. This was not surprising, given that in the last few years, an increasing number of African countries have been signing military and economic agreements with both Russia and China. So consequently, the vote or abstentions was simply a confirmation of a trend that has been going on for several years. Because, seeing that the agreements with the West have historically led to the unfair exploitation of their resources and manipulation of their political systems, many African countries are simply turning their eyes to the East for partnerships. Thirdly, the conflict is creating major wheat supply disruptions around the world, with Russia and Ukraine accounting for most of the global supply. And Africa could potentially pay a heavy price because Russia decided to flex its food power muscle by enforcing a blockade that is preventing cereal shipments from leaving Ukrainian ports. The African continent is facing the scary prospect of a food shortage. And so to discuss the problem, Russian President Vladimir Putin invited Senegalese President and current Chairman of the African Union, Macky Sall, in the city of Sochi on June 3rd, 2022. And so President Sall was accompanied by Moussa Faki Mahamat, who is the chairman of the African Union Commission and is from Chad. Now, according to a press release from President Macky Sall, the Russian president and his guest discussed the release of stock grain and fertilizers because the blockade particularly hurts African countries. Now, the three events I described illustrate how Africa is part of the grass in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And so as a result, I asked myself the question, do Africans want to continue being the grass that get trampled? Or do they want to be elephants that can stand their ground and rebuff incoming attacks? Upon reflection, the answer is clear to me. Africans should obviously not aspire to be the grass that gets trampled, but they should also not aspire to become the proverbial elephants. As impressive as the elephant metaphor comes across, the notion still lacks ambition. Instead of wanting to be elephants, Africans should aspire to be mighty lions, capable of terrifying all potential attackers with a mighty roar. Now, however, regardless of whether Africans want to use the metaphor of a mighty lion or elephants, the central idea is to gain enough strength and command respect on the international community stage. So you might ask yourself, how exactly can Africans accomplish such a lofty objective? The answer? By creating a United States of Africa. To be clear, when I'm referring to Africans, I am not only referring to Africans in the African continent. Instead, I'm referring to the entire African diaspora across the world. If you are new to AfriKili, this platform advocates for the creation of a powerful United States of Africa as a way of destroying the status quo and finally allowing the African continent to fulfill its potential. We believe that in the process, Africa could become an economic powerhouse and also a political one that will command respect across the world. A creation of the United States of Africa would not only benefit Africans on the continent, but the entire diaspora in the Americas, Europe, the Caribbean, or Asia. A strong United States of Africa could be a powerful tool that will help reform societies and eliminate the systemic injustices against Black people that were enacted 100 years ago and continue to create biases in our societies today. The existence of a strong United States of Africa would have prevented Africans from being the grass in the three examples I mentioned before. Let's look at the first example of black people that were segregated from the general displaced crowd fleeing Ukraine and were prevented from crossing into Poland at gunpoint. I'm sure that the Polish border guard would not have displayed such an overt racism if they had feared potential retaliation. For example, if the black people fleeing the war had been clearly identified as American citizens, the Polish would have provided clear passage without hesitation, just to avoid any type of retaliation from the powerful United States of America. Now, it is true that American citizens sometimes face injustices in other countries. Case in point, we have Brittney Griner, who is the famous WNBA professional woman black player who's currently being held in a Russian prison. To many, this is a clear case of injustice. However, for the most part, the US military and economic power tends to provide a protective shield for its citizens around the world. So in the same line of idea, a powerful United States of Africa would command justice and respect for black people around the world, including within the United States of America. As things currently stand, we have preconceived notions of systemic racism that are grounded in historical fallacies and are still causing disrespect and discrimination for black people all over the world. We believe that a formidable United States of Africa could create a powerful protective shield for black people around the world and be a catalyst to eradicating systemic discriminations. In the second example of African countries being pressured to expressly choose a side during the United Nations General Assembly's votes to sanction Russia for its invasion on Ukraine, well, it comes down to power dynamics in international relations. Clearly, the United States of America and other nuclear power states do not experience the same amount of pressure or scrutiny when votes are brought up to the UN General Assembly. So instead of being pressured by other nations, countries like the USA are often the ones influencing agendas and discussions within the United Nations. So I believe that a powerful military and economic United States of Africa would also shield Africans from this type of voting pressure, while providing the necessary leverage to influence agendas that are being discussed within the international community. In the third example of grain shortage, it is both an absurdity and an aberration that Africa could face famine simply because Russia is enforcing a blockade, preventing cereal from leaving Ukrainian ports. I mean, Africa has millions of hectares of unused arable land, sufficient to not only produce enough food and wheat to feed its entire population, but also become the leading exporter. If we look back through world history, we will see that wheat has often been a strategic ingredient that allowed world powers to strengthen their position. For example, during the Cold War, the United States of America was able to incentivize its allies against the Soviet bloc by using its growing wheat production to offer a package that included both military support and food aid through the Marshall Plan. Similarly, in less than 20 years, Russia has been able to become the biggest exporter of wheat and increase its geopolitical power by intentionally investing in its agricultural capacity. The times are too grave for Africans to continue being dependent on wheat and cereal for such a strategic ingredient to feed its population. I believe that a strong United States of Africa would allow Africans to aggregate the resources needed to implement a dedicated agricultural plan across the continent and maximize the output of its arable lands, just like Russia did. As I previously stated, Africans must gain enough strength to destroy all the historical pillars of systemic injustices against black people, but also command respect in international relations. Africans do not have an inherent deficiency that makes them incapable of changing the narrative and becoming mighty lions. Now, it is true that when elephants fight, the grass suffers. But it is also true that a roaring lion kills no game. So consequently, if Africans are to become lions, they also need to develop the strength to be able to attack in unison when necessary. Ultimately, I believe that the creation of a United States of Africa offers the best path for Black people in Africa, in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in Asia, and everywhere else in the international community arena. So there you have it. As we have seen through this video, the African world is part of the grass that is getting trampled by elephants fighting in Ukraine. However, Africans do not have inherent deficiencies that will prevent them from changing the narrative. Not only do Africans have the ability to become elephants, capable of rebuffing incoming attacks, but they also have the ability to become mighty lions, capable of terrifying all potential attackers with a mighty roar. To pull it off, Africans would need to gain enough military and economic strength to command respect on the international community stage. And how exactly can Africans accomplish such a majestic objective? By creating a United States of Africa. As I like to say, we are seeking a revolution and changes that cannot be done by one person or one movement. It can only be done by collective effort. Which is why AfriKili strongly advocates for working in laser-focused coalitions, pooling resources and aggregating efforts. Yes, the AfriKili movement seeks a grandiose dream of unity across the African world. If we get this right together, our actions will echo for generations and will be known as the generation that finally put Africa back on track towards unity and prosperity towards a United States of Africa. Whether you were born in Africa, on the continent, born in the diaspora, relocated after your birth, or your ancestors were taken out of the continent hundreds of years ago, you are essential to this new birth. Therefore, let's join our effort in this cause. Within the AfriKili movement or within other coalitions, let's join the fight for a United States of Africa, which will be for the benefit of the entire African diaspora. Thank you for your attention. And before closing, let me just remind you to subscribe to our AfriKili YouTube channel, but also very important, sign up with your email address on our blog at www.afrikili.com. And finally, please like or follow our social media profiles on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. There is an exciting journey ahead of us towards a better Africa and a better world. Can we really raise Africa to become a true global powerhouse, capable of commanding respect on the international stage? Yes, we can. It will happen. I have this dream. Let's get to work. AfriKili, African intelligence, to build a new Africa. Peace be with you.